My mother-in-law canceled my baby shower behind my back and said, "We don't celebrate mistakes in this family." I found out the same day and cried alone. But months later, when the hospital wing got renovated in my baby's name after I made a record-breaking donation, she couldn't even look me in the eye. My name is Emily Parker, and I'm 27 years old. Before everything that happened, I honestly thought life was finally falling into place. I had married the love of my life, Ryan Parker, a sweet, easygoing guy with deep blue eyes and a heart that at least I believed could do no wrong. Ryan was 29, a software engineer, and honestly, everything about him screamed stability. I craved that, especially after growing up with a single mom who worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. But if Ryan was a dream, his mother, Margaret Parker, was the nightmare that came attached. Margaret was the type of woman who could make you feel like you owed her something just by breathing the same air. She was poised, wealthy, judgmental, and old-fashioned in a way that wasn't charming. She believed there was a proper way to do everything from folding napkins to raising children, and she made it very clear that I was never quite good enough for her only son. When I found out I was pregnant just 8 months into our marriage, I was scared but excited. Ryan was supportive, wrapping his arms around me and telling me we'd figure it all out together. I believed him. I needed to believe him. I didn't grow up around big family celebrations, so the idea of a baby shower, friends and family gathering to celebrate our little one, it meant more to me than I could even put into words. Margaret offered to take care of planning it. She said it was a family tradition for the grandmother to be to handle the shower. I was hesitant at first. I knew how she felt about me, but Ryan insisted it would be good for bonding. So I agreed, convincing myself that maybe this time Margaret would see how much I wanted to be part of her family. Weeks passed. I bought a simple light blue maternity dress for the shower. I picked out little favors online. I imagined the cake, the laughter, the feeling of being surrounded by people excited to meet my baby boy. I was counting down the days like a child waiting for Christmas morning. The morning of the shower arrived. I did my hair in soft curls, put on the blue dress, and stood in front of the mirror, my hands resting protectively over my bum. I remember whispering to my son, "Today's all about you, buddy." My heart was light, hopeful. Ryan drove me to Margaret's house. When we pulled up, something was off. There were no balloons, no decorations, no cars lined up outside. Ryan frowned and checked his phone. He made a call. I heard Margaret answer. "Oh," she said in that sickly sweet tone she used when she wanted to sound innocent. "Didn't Ryan tell you? The baby shower was canceled. We don't celebrate mistakes in this family." It was like the world stopped spinning. I blinked at Ryan, waiting for him to say something, anything to make it better. He just sat there, frozen, his face pale. "Margaret hung upp." I sat there, dressed up like a fool, clutching the tiny favors I had so carefully chosen. The silence in the car was so loud it hurt. Tears welled up, but I fought them back, refusing to let them fall in front of Ryan. "She canceled it?" I finally croaked out. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't know. I swear. She told me everything was fine." I nodded stiffly. "Take me home," I whispered. He drove, but it was like the air between us had shifted. I stared out the window the whole way back, trying not to sob, trying not to scream. When we pulled into the driveway, I didn't wait for him. I rushed inside, slammed the bedroom door, and finally let the tears come. I cried for hours. Cried until my body ached. Cried until my baby kicked, almost like he was trying to comfort me from the inside. That night, Ryan tried to apologize, but it felt hollow. Like he didn't even fully grasp what had been taken from me. It wasn't just a party. It was the acknowledgement that our son, was something to celebrate. And now, thanks to Margaret, that moment would never come. Weeks passed. My due date crept closer. Margaret didn't reach out once. No calls, no apologies, nothing. Ryan's family, his aunts, cousins, all stayed silent too, either too cowardly or too complicit to say a word. It was like they had collectively decided my baby and I didn't matter. I told myself I didn't need them. I told myself I was strong, but when the contractions finally hit, and I was rushed to the hospital. The only person I wanted besides Ryan was my mom, who had passed away 3 years earlier. I felt so alone. The delivery was rough, 17 hours of labor. I almost needed a C-section, but somehow I pushed through. And when they placed my son on my chest, all wrinkly and wailing and perfect, I knew he was worth every second of pain. His name was Oliver James Parker, 7 pounds, 4 ounces of pure magic. Ryan cried, holding him. I cried too. For a moment, it was just us, a new family, nothing else mattered. Or at least, that's what I tried to tell myself. But Margaret showed up the next day at the hospital, sweeping into the room like she owned the place, wearing a designer coat and carrying a tiny bouquet that still had the price tag on it. She didn't even look at me. Just went straight to Oliver, cooing and fussing, acting like she hadn't completely broken my heart. I forced a smile for Oliver, but inside I was shattering all over again. And that's when I decided I would never let her make me feel powerless again. Not ever. The first few weeks at home with Oliver were a blur of sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and pure, overwhelming love. I had expected that maybe, just maybe, Margaret would soften now that her grandson was here. But if anything, she became colder. She visited a few times, never staying long, always criticizing something the way I dressed Oliver, the brand of formula I used when breastfeeding didn't go smoothly, even the color of the nursery walls. Ryan saw it, but he didn't fight her. Not really. He would sigh, say things like, "She's just old-fashioned, Em, don't take it personally." But how could I not? Every word out of her mouth felt like another tiny cut. One afternoon, when Oliver was about 2 months old, Margaret dropped by unannounced. She waltzed into the house, took one look at the laundry piled on the couch, and sneered, "Well, looks like some people aren't cut out for motherhood." I just stood there, frozen, clutching Oliver to my chest. Ryan wasn't home, it was just me, alone with the woman who had made it her mission to make me feel like a failure. Something inside me cracked that day. After she left, I put Oliver in his crib and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the bills stacked in front of me. Hospital bills, pediatrician bills, mortgage payments. It felt like I was drowning. I needed a lifeline. I needed to take control. And so I pulled out my old laptop and started drafting a plan. Back before I got pregnant, I had been working on a mobile app idea, a simple, user-friendly platform for new moms to connect with local resources, pediatricians, mental health support, babysitters. I'd put it on hold when the morning sickness hit hard, but maybe now was the time to pick it back up. I stayed up night after night while Oliver slept, coding with one hand and rocking his bassinet with the other. I poured every ounce of hurt, anger, and love into that app. A few months later, I launched it quietly, without telling anyone except a few mom groups online. It exploded. Within 3 months, my app had over 100 downloads. Investors started reaching out. I was featured in an online parenting magazine. Sponsorship offers flooded my inbox. It was surreal. Suddenly, I wasn't just that girl who married Ryan Parker or the mistake Margaret had written me off as. I was Emily Parker, CEO and founder of Nestlink. And I wasn't done. I had been quietly putting aside the profits, watching them grow, dreaming bigger. Then one morning, while scrolling through the news on my phone, I saw a headline that made my heart race. The local hospital, the same one where Oliver had been born, was struggling. They needed funding to renovate the outdated maternity wing. They were at risk of closing it down. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. Without hesitation, I called the hospital board and scheduled a meeting. A week later, I walked into that meeting room wearing a tailored suit I bought just for the occasion and pledged a record-breaking donation in Oliver's name. Enough to completely renovate the maternity wing, enough to save it. They were stunned, grateful, and they asked if they could name the new wing after Oliver. I said yes. It was the proudest moment of my life. The official unveiling ceremony was scheduled 2 months later. Ryan was proud, supportive, a little stunned by how much I'd accomplished. Margaret, on the other hand, acted strangely distant when we mentioned it. Almost nervous. I smiled to myself every time she shifted uncomfortably. She had no idea just how public this was about to become. The day of the unveiling arrived. The hospital threw a huge event, news cameras, community leaders, Even the mayor attended. Ryan stood next to me, holding Oliver, who wore a tiny navy blue blazer and matching shoes. I wore a white dress, not because it was traditional, but because I wanted to reclaim everything Margaret had tried to steal from me. When they pulled down the sheet covering the new sign, revealing the words, "The Oliver Parker Maternity Wing," the crowd erupted in applause. I caught Margaret's face in the crowd. She looked like she might actually faint. Her lips were pressed so tightly together, they turned white. Her hands trembled slightly as she clapped the bare minimum, like it physically hurt her to acknowledge what had just happened. I felt powerful, not petty, not angry, just powerful. All those nights I cried myself to sleep. All those times I believed I wasn't enough. They led to this. Later, during the reception, Margaret tried to corner me, tried to mutter something about how she always knew I'd turn out fine. But she couldn't meet my eyes. Couldn't even lift her gaze past my collarbone. I didn't need her apology anymore. I was beyond it. And as I kissed Oliver's soft forehead and breathed in his baby scent, I realized something even bigger. I wasn't the mistake. I was the miracle. A few days after the unveiling ceremony, I thought the tension with Margaret might finally ease. Maybe seeing what I had accomplished would change something in her. Maybe she'd finally respect me. I was wrong. One chilly afternoon, as I was feeding Oliver his bottle by the living room window, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. Just a blurry photo at first, then another and another. I stared, heart pounding. It was Margaret. In each picture, she was holding Oliver at different family gatherings, ones I hadn't been invited to, ones I hadn't even known about. In one photo, she had captioned it, "Introducing our precious boy to the real family." My hands shook. She had been parading my son around like a trophy without telling me. Like I wasn't even his mother, like I didn't matter. Ifet, chic? Ryan came home to find me sobbing in the kitchen, the phone still clenched in my hand. When I showed him the photos, he went pale. For once, he didn't try to make excuses for her. That night, we had the biggest fight we'd ever had. Ryan confessed that Margaret had been trying to get him to reconsider our marriage since before Oliver was born. That she thought I'd trapped him. That she believed Oliver belonged to the Parker family, not to me. It was like every dream I had about having a loving, supportive family shattered into 1,000 pieces. I packed a bag that night. Not because I wanted to leave Ryan, but because I needed to protect myself and my son. We went to stay at a small rented cottage about 30 minutes outside the city just for a while, just until I could think straight. The first few nights there were hard, lonely, quiet, except for Oliver's tiny breathing. But then something unexpected happened. One morning, while walking Oliver around the little town, a woman struck up a conversation with me at the coffee shop. Her name was Denise, a retired pediatric nurse who now volunteered with young moms who needed support. She introduced me to a network of women who lifted each other up instead of tearing each other down. Women who helped me realize that family isn't always the one you're born into, sometimes it's the one you find. They encouraged me to expand Nestlink beyond just an app, to host real-life meetups, conferences, workshops. It was terrifying. At first, public speaking had never been my strength, but I realized if I could survive Margaret, I could survive anything. The first Nestlink conference was held 6 months later in the city's biggest event center. Thousands of women attended, sponsors poured in, newspapers covered it. It was bigger than I had ever imagined. Ryan showed up that day, standing awkwardly in the back with flowers in his hand. He looked different, tired, almost humbled. After my keynote speech, he pulled me aside. "I miss you," he said simply. "Both of you." I wanted to believe him. I did. But I had learned to protect my heart. I told him he needed to prove it, not to me, but to Oliver. In the months that followed, Ryan worked hard to rebuild what he had let Margaret destroy: therapy sessions, parenting classes, real effort. Margaret, on the other hand, grew desperate. She tried everything: guilt trips, fake apologies, even showing up uninvited to one of my meetups, dramatically sobbing about how she missed her grandson. I calmly asked security to escort her out. It was a moment I'll never forget, not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it was peaceful. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I simply chose my peace over her chaos. When Oliver turned 2, we celebrated with a small, cozy party at the cottage: balloons, cupcakes, a backyard full of laughter, no fancy caterers, no long guest lists, just the people who had shown up for us when it mattered most. Margaret wasn't invited. Later that night, as I rocked Oliver to sleep, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a photo or a cruel message. It was an email from a major publishing house. They had heard about Nestlink, about my story. They wanted me to write a book. At first, I hesitated. What could I possibly say that hadn't already been lived? But as I stared down at Oliver's peaceful face, I knew I would tell the truth, the messy, painful, beautiful truth, not just about surviving Margaret, but about surviving myself. Writing the book cracked open wounds I didn't even realize I still carried. Every chapter was a piece of my heart: the betrayals, the loneliness, the quiet victories. I stayed up late after Oliver fell asleep, pouring everything onto the pages. When the book was finally published, I didn't expect much, but within a week, it skyrocketed to the bestseller lists. Emails flooded in from women across the country, sharing their own battles with toxic in-laws, broken families, and finding their voice again. It was overwhelming, and healing in ways therapy never quite reached. Ryan was proud of me, genuinely proud. I could see it in the way he talked about me to friends, the way he showed up at every single book signing, standing quietly in the back, Oliver perched on his shoulders. For the first time, I thought maybe we could make it. Maybe we really had survived the worst. Until the day I came home and found Margaret sitting on my porch, waiting. She looked thinner, older, almost fragile, a stark contrast to the towering force she used to be. Without asking, she stood up and shoved a stack of papers into my hand. Legal papers. She was suing us for grandparents' rights. I stared at her, speechless. This woman who had humiliated me, undermined me, paraded my child around behind my back, now wanted court-mandated access to him. My stomach turned. Ryan was furious when he found out. He wanted to fight it immediately. But our lawyer warned us. Courts sometimes sympathize with grandparents, especially wealthy, influential ones like Margaret. It felt like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The court battle dragged on for months. Margaret's lawyers painted me as unstable, vindictive, trying to cut her out of Oliver's life for no reason. He felt violated, exposed. Every decision I had ever made as a mother was questioned, dissected, twisted, but I refused to back down. I brought receipts, text messages, emails, photos, everything showing Margaret's pattern of manipulation and cruelty. I told the truth, even when it was ugly, even when it hurt. And finally, after 6 brutal months, the judge ruled in our favor. Margaret's petition was denied. She wasn't granted any visitation rights. The victory was bittersweet because as I walked out of that courtroom, hand in hand with Ryan and Oliver, I realized something important. It wasn't about Margaret anymore. It was about me. I had spent so long trying to prove my worth to people who were determined not to see it, but I didn't need their approval. I never did. The day the court ruling came down, Ryan proposed to me again, properly this time. Not under family pressure, not out of guilt, but because he genuinely wanted to build a new life with me and our son. He got down on one knee in the middle of Oliver's favorite park, a simple gold band in his hand. I said yes, but not because I needed him to save me. I said yes because I had already saved myself. A few weeks later, as we planned a small, intimate wedding, Ryan received an invitation in the mail. Handwritten, expensive stationery. It was from Margaret. She was getting married to a man nearly half her age. The pettiness would have made me laugh if it didn't hurt so much. It was clear she was desperate to replace what she had lost, the family she had destroyed with her own hands. Ryan didn't go to the wedding, neither did we. Instead, we spent that weekend camping by a lake, just the 3 of us, roasting marshmallows and telling silly stories under the stars. It wasn't the life I had once imagined. It was better because it was real. It was ours. Months passed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, life was peaceful. Nestling kept growing beyond anything I had dreamed of. We started partnerships with hospitals, community centers, even schools. I was invited to speak at conferences, Oliver was thriving, and Ryan had settled into a new job that allowed him more time with us. Everything felt right. Until one evening when I got a call from an unknown number, I almost didn't answer. I was putting Oliver to bed, humming softly under my breath. But some strange feeling in my gut made me pick up. It was Margaret. Her voice was thin, shaking. She told me she was sick. Stage 4 cancer, terminal. At first, I didn't know what to say. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear her words. She wasn't calling to apologize. She wasn't calling to make peace. She was calling because she needed something. She wanted to meet Oliver one last time. My first instinct was to say no, to protect the little boy she had tried to claim, to use like a pawn in her power games. But then I looked at Oliver, his tiny fists clutching his stuffed dinosaur, his sweet, innocent face, and I thought about what kind of mother I wanted to be. I didn't want to teach him bitterness. I didn't want to let Margaret's cruelty harden my heart. So, against every instinct in my body, I agreed. We met her at a neutral place, a small, quiet room set up by a hospice care center. Nurses stood discreetly nearby in case things went wrong. When Margaret saw Oliver, she burst into tears, real, raw sobs I had never seen from her before. She reached out a trembling hand, and Oliver, curious and kind as ever, toddled over and let her hug him. She whispered something into his ear, but I couldn't hear what. And then, with Ryan and me standing frozen in shock, she did something even more unbelievable. She handed me a folder. Inside were documents. She was leaving everything she had, the estate, the investments, everything to Oliver. Not to Ryan, not to me. To Oliver, tears burned my eyes. For the first time, I saw Margaret not as the monster I had built up in my mind, but as a broken woman facing the end of her life, trying in her own twisted way to make some kind of amends. I didn't say anything. I just nodded. A week later, Margaret passed away quietly in her sleep. No grand gestures, no dramatic last words, just silence. The funeral was small. Ryan and I went, mostly for closure. A few distant relatives, some old friends, a handful of people she had kept at arm's length for years. I thought that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. 2 months after her death, a man in a suit showed up at our door. He introduced himself as Margaret's private attorney. Apparently, there was more she hadn't told us. Margaret had quietly purchased a massive, rundown building in the city center, a place she had once dreamed of turning into a luxury hotel. She never got the chance, but in her final will, she had left specific instructions. She wanted the building transformed into a community center for struggling mothers and families. She had even requested that it be named after Nestling in honor of what I had built. It was the last thing I ever expected from her, and it brought me to my knees. We spent the next year renovating the building, pouring our hearts and souls into it. When it finally opened, it wasn't just a building, it was a lifeline for thousands of families who needed hope. The grand opening was packed. Reporters, news cameras, city officials. As I stood there holding Oliver on my hip, Brian's arm around my waist, I realized something. I hadn't just survived Margaret. I had turned her cruelty into something beautiful, something lasting, something that would outlive all of us. Oliver wouldn't remember the petty battles, the hurtful words. He would remember that love won, always. And as the first families walked through the doors of the new Nestling Center, I smiled through the tears because this time I wasn't crying alone. I was surrounded by a family I had built, one filled with kindness, resilience, and hope. The family Margaret had tried so hard to destroy, but in the end had unknowingly helped create